Elisa Dolittle is a flower girl who wants to improve her accent to get a good job in a flower shop. Therefore, she asks Professor Higgins to help her to speak more genteel. Will she achieve her goal? Well, let's see what happened in this story, Pygmalion. This book was published in 1913 by George Bernard Shaw. He was born on July 26, 1856, and he died on November 2nd, 1950. George Bernard Shaw wrote this book at a time when phonetics was a boom topic. He said that German and Spanish were a very clear language that foreigners of those languages could understand very well. But in English it was not the same, because sometimes it was so badly spoken by them that they could understand very well themselves. The first act takes place at Covent Garden at 11:15 p.m. It's raining, and there are people under the portico of St. Paul's Church waiting their rain stop. There is a woman, Mrs. Rainsford Hills, and her daughter Clara, and her son Freddie. They send Fred to get a taxi. After that, a flower girl arrives and starts to talk with them. Then she starts to talk with an older gentleman, and behind them there is a man taking also the flower girl speech. The flower girl, Elisa Doolittle, is afraid because she thinks that the man is a police officer, but the man is only interested in phonetically noting the flower girl curse tone English. And he thinks that he could teach her to speak more genteel in just a few months. This man is the famous phonetician Henry Higgins, and the older gentleman is Colonel Pickering, a student of Indian dialects. They know a little bit about each other, so Mr. Higgins invites Pickering to his house. The next day, at Wimpole Street, at Mr. Higgins' house, Mr. Higgins and Colonel Pickering are having a conversation. But Eliza Doolittle, the flower girl, arrives, and she offered Mr. Higgins to pay him to teach her to speak more genteel. At the beginning, Mr. Higgins refused, but Pickering said that he will cover all expenses if in 6 months Mr. Higgins can pass Eliza Doolittle off as a duchess or a lady. And well, Mr. Higgins accepts the bet. But then, Eliza's father arrived, and he was asking for a amount of money because they had taken her daughter. At the beginning, all of them they started to have a conversation, but finally, Mr. Higgins accepted to give him a amount of money. So, Mr. Higgins started to teach Eliza Little a good manners and a properly way to speak. Months later, Mr. Higgins takes Eliza on a visit to her mother, a dignified lady. The visit was a test because he wants to measure his advance with Eliza. In Mrs. Higgins' house, there is the Mrs. Airford, her daughter Clara, and her son Freddie. So, at the beginning, Eliza started to do it very well, but her vocabulary and the unfortunate choice of topics gives away her humble beginning. It was a kind of terrible situation for her and for Mr. Higgins, but Freddie started to fall in love with her. Later, Mrs. Higgins called her son Henry Higgins and Colonel Pickering because they were treating Eliza like a doll. And especially because they didn't know what will happen with her when the experiment is over. And she told them that they are a kind of kids because they are playing with her human doll. Months later, Mr. Higgins and Mr. Pickering considered that Eliza is ready. So they put her talents in a garden party, and she performs flawlessly. Back in the house, they start to congratulate each other by the victory, because the experiment is over and they got it. So they started to have a conversation, and at the end, they say goodnight to each other. So Mr. Higgins started to go to the second level. Mr. Higgins starts to go to the second level, but he returns to the living room to get his sliper. When he was there, he finds Eliza weeping with rage. She was so angry that she threw the sliper to Mr. Higgins' face. They start to have a discussion because Elisa heard that when they were talking that they said that Elisa was just an experiment and that's it. They see her like just like experiment. After that, they started to have a discussion to the point that Elisa in the morning left the house. In the last act, Mr. Higgins and Mr. Pickering go to Mrs. Higgins' house. And it was a big surprise that they discovered that Elisa was staying with Mrs. Higgins. And Mrs. Higgins defends Eliza for leaving Mr. Pickering and Mr. Higgins. Eliza would come and start to talk with them, and she said to Mr. Pickering, "Thank you, Mr. Pickering, because you have been very kind with me from the beginning." So she was so happy with him, but she decided not longer to go with Mr. Henry Higgins. So at the end, Mr. Higgins and Eliza they had a conversation, but at the end, Eliza decided to not return to Mr. Higgins' house. And to summarize everything, Eliza get in love with Freddie, and they get married. My textual analysis about this book. Well, if we analyze the book, Miss Shaw, he was trying to express in this book the different social class in that time, because in that time, in the 1913, the phonetic was a boom topic. So everybody, the social class, the people that were rich, they interact with people and they used to evaluate the way that the people speak, the clothes that they used to have. And it happens nowadays. For example, there are a lot of people, especially rich people, that they try to talk with they evaluate the people they talk with her accent. And if we analyze this in a deeper way in our country, sometimes people say that there are people that had an Indian accent, and they start to laugh for them. They start to make some jokes to them, and this happens nowadays. But something very important is that with education, we can change our life. In my personal opinion, I recommend this book because, well, at the beginning I thought that it will be boring reading a detective tour. But then the story is very interesting. Well, I really love this book. This is a very interesting book. It says the book has some points very important about social classes and the importance of the education, the importance of language, our accent, and the way how we speak. I really recommend this book. In conclusion, well, I love this book, and we can say that Mr. Higgins he was changing the life of Lisa Doolittle. And the education is so important for us because around the world it's important it's really important to speak properly in a more gentle way. Yeah, we know that there are some occasions that we can speak in an informal way, in a formal way. But in this book, we can see that the important about education, a good pronunciation, a good grammar. And well, I recommend this book, and this book was fantastic.